Welcome to the World United. Welcome to the World United.
Our next speaker is Mary McGowan. Let me introduce her to all of you today. Mary McGowan studied translation science and lexicography at University of Copenhagen and published two academic papers. One, translating Merintis, that is in 2010. She's a translator and a teacher at the Merintis Institute Copenhagen and has lectured on Merintis cosmology in Scandinavia, USA, and UK. She graduated in music from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, London, in 1976 and subsequently trained as a teacher of the Alexander Technique. She taught at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, the Royal Danish Academy of Music, the Rhythmic Music Conservatory Copenhagen, and the Carl Nelson Academy of Music. Thank you so much, Ms. Mary, for gracing the occasion, and over to you. Your topic today is the ongoing evolution of human sexuality. Thank you so much.
So best wishes, Mary McGowan, for your wonderful presentation. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to join you. Will it be possible for me to share my screen during this presentation? A lot of people are wondering today what's happening with human sexuality. We see a variety of sexual states and behaviors. We see a growing interest in studies that are investigating aspects of human sexuality and gender issues. And we're asking ourselves, why is marriage becoming increasingly unstable? Why do many experience conflicting needs to express their creative and intellectual abilities, and the conflict that there is between that and being a good spouse or good parents? Why are some people attracted to their own sex? Some people are attracted to the opposite sex. Some people are attracted to both sex. So what's going on? And it's some of these questions I want to address today. I want to see if I could just share my screen. So, can you see that? So, what I'm going to talk about today is based on the work of the Danish writer Martinus. He was born in 1890 and died in 1981. Here you see two pictures of him. And in 1921, you can see him on the left there, at the age of 30, he had a spontaneous spiritual experience that enabled him to see all the spiritual laws and principles of life, everything, all these principles behind all physical phenomena. And this resulted in him creating a spiritual science or a cosmology and writing a large number of works. His entire body of work is known as the Third Testament. His main work is Livets Bog in Danish, the Book of Life. He wanted it to be known by its Danish title in all languages. And this is the work I'm currently translating. Volume 5, which came out in 2018, has a lot to say about sexuality. You can also find things in the rest of his royal picture, but particularly Volume 5. And all his books are available on Amazon. So I'll just unshare for a minute. How do I do that? Stop share. Yes. So he describes the human being as having two sexual poles, a masculine pole and a feminine pole. In men, the masculine pole dominates, and in women, the feminine pole dominates. But the male pole is present in women, and the feminine pole is present in men. And we all know that we have evolved from animals, but according to Martinus, this process of evolution isn't finished yet. We evolve through reincarnation, which I don't have time to go into today, but Martinus calls us terrestrial human beings, in contrast to what he calls real human beings that we're on our way to becoming. And he mentions Christ as being an example of such a real human being. So Christ had reached a level of moral perfection that we are heading for. So at the moment, we are the solution to the riddle of the Sphinx. We are partly animal and partly human. And this can be seen in our behavior and in our sexuality. We have our aggressive, egoistic, animalistic sides, and we have our more loving, altruistic, and compassionate sides. So Martinus's intention in writing his works was to help us understand this ongoing transition from animal to man and to support us in this process. He describes us as having a three-part structure. We have what we call the I, not this kind of I, but the I as in I am, or I am hungry, I am full, and so on. This I is the innermost core of our being. It's the invisible something that experiences and creates. Nobody can see my I, but we know it's there. He says that this I is connected to an ability to create and to experience. And these two aspects he calls the superconsciousness. So, and then we have an organism and a consciousness. So we have these three aspects: the I, which is a creator or experiencer, an ability to create and experience, and an organism and a consciousness through which we can experience and create. Martinus describes these two sexual poles as being organs in this superconsciousness. And they combine with various energies in our consciousness, such as instinct, feeling, intelligence, compassion, intuition, memory, and so on, and determine our experience of life. They determine our experience of all contrasts, light and darkness, love and hate, and so on. Our behavior and our experience of life are dependent on our knowledge. And since our knowledge of sexuality is very limited, we often act in ways that cause ourselves and others problems. A lack of knowledge can also give us problems understanding our own sexual situation, which can also lead to a lot of confusion. According to Martinus, our sexual state is not permanent. The two sexual poles change in an eternal rhythm, which means they go from a maximum to a minimum and back to a maximum again for all eternity. At the moment, the so-called opposite pole in our consciousness is growing. That means the feminine pole is growing in men, the masculine pole is growing in women. So if you want to be 100% male, then the feminine pole must be totally latent, so to speak, and the opposite for women. But that's a stage we've left behind us a long time ago. So this growth of the opposite pole in our consciousness manifests itself in many ways. And for this reason, we see that people are at very different stages in their evolution. Martinus describes two basic categories of people: creative types and reproductive types. Martinus has various different typologies, but this is one of them. So the 100% creative types would experience becoming a parent as a catastrophe, because parenthood would stand in the way of their art or science or whatever creative endeavor they were involved in. And I certainly know women who became pregnant and had the baby adopted because it would stand in the way of their way of becoming an artist. So this is not unknown. And then there are the 100% reproductive types, whose happiness and idea of bliss is to have a partner and a family, and that's their whole life. But most of us are somewhere between these two extremes. We are what Martinus would call transitional types, where we're torn between the desire for family life and the desire to become a genius in some creative field. Martinus calls this the zone of unhappy marriages, as well as the zone of unfinished creative talents. In these people, the intellect has grown too much for them to be content with family life and parenthood alone. there's another side to the consciousness that needs nourishment too. This leads to the conflicts that we often see. We see, for example, women who are struggling to bring up children and write a thesis at the same time. For example, this is a common dilemma. I'll just share my screen again and let me see. And go on. Here we see one of Martinez's 100 symbols. He drew 100 symbols of spiritual realities. And we see here, the symbol is called animal and human thought climates, and it should be read from the bottom up. If you see, I hope you can see my cursor here, you see this orange part, which is the animal kingdom, and this slightly thicker purple line is a transition between the animal and the first primitive human beings. This is where the first human beings stood on two legs and walked the planet Earth. And then we see this area where there's yellow coming into the picture. This is a transition zone. This is the unfinished terrestrial human being zone. And then we have the real human beings up here, the yellow part. The orange color stands for everything of an aggressive nature, of an animalistic nature, egoistic, and so on. It's the killing principle, where the yellow is compassion, neighborly love, peace, and so on, harmony. So he says that we are at these two steps of evolution. So we see the humane side is growing in us and the animal side is degenerating. Very few of us are up at this stage, he says. If we go to this other part of the symbol on the right side, we see this figure here, where the green color, which symbolizes the male pole, is totally dominating at the beginning of the animal kingdom. And at the stages we are at, we see that the yellow pole, which is the feminine pole, has grown significantly and is continuing to grow. The opposite case is the case for women, where we see the feminine pole dominating at the beginning, and then the green pole coming in other words, the male pole. So we are in this transition where the male side is developing in the women and the feminine side is developing in the men. This has many consequences for us. We can see different types. We can see people who are very, very happily married, and that's their whole life. And if they're monogamous, they can be very, very happy, and their honeymoon lasts their whole life, so to speak. But then again, in where we are, in these two zones, we see a lot of the degeneration of marriage, really. We see a lot of divorces. People can't stay in love for their whole life. Maybe Martinez says at one point they go in and out of marriages like they get on and off of trams. And then as we get further up, we can see that some people become sexually conscious in their opposite pole. So that means a woman would begin to look at life with the eyes of a man, so to speak, and would be attracted to the same sex or both sexes. Oh, no, that was, I didn't do that, sorry. How did I go back? Sorry, someone took over my screen. I was here. Yes. Gradually, these sexual poles get into balance. So the male and the female aspects of our consciousness become equal. And at this stage, we become cosmically conscious. And this is where this very thick purple line is, and this star, which signifies cosmic consciousness. This means this state of total initiation, where we get direct personal initiation into the solution to the mystery of life, nothing less. And here we can only use our sexuality to be truly of a joy and blessing to other people. We can't hurt anybody, we can't harm anybody. there is no sexual derailments, there's no perversity, no sadism or anything like that, which are some of the undesirable effects that can happen on this otherwise natural development. There's a lot that could be said about these different stages, but here I would refer you to Leave's book, The Book of Life, Volume 5, where you can read more. So Martinez talks basically about 3 sexes: the male sex here, the female sex, and the human sex. So we're going towards this human sex. And of course, what we need is to be morally alert in this transition, because perhaps you're married and you fall in love with someone else. Then one has to be really think about the situation and see how one can reduce the suffering involved, and perhaps not promise more than one can keep. Anyway, he said a whole new moral conscience will develop around this sexual evolution, and he wants to contribute to that. So, as I said, when you get to this state of total balance between the sexual poles, your consciousness opens up for cosmic consciousness. These other figures that I don't have time to get into now, they have to do with the negative sides of one's consciousness, the killing principle, the desire for revenge, and so on. And this one in particular is all the suffering connected with the sexual pole transformation. And that can be things like loneliness, it can be the unhappiness of being childless, it can be the persecution you experience as being homosexual or bisexual, or having a sexuality that people just don't understand. There's a lot of suffering, divorces, there's a lot of suffering involved in this transition. And this is what Martinez wants to help us with. But when we rid ourselves of arrogance, which is this figure, we develop humility. And when humility grows and grows and grows in our consciousness, then it can open up. So we get this total insight into the solution to the mystery of life. If we go on to the last slide, which is this one, here Martinez symbolizes, it's actually a symbol about health, but I will just take the sexual aspect here. Here he shows the primary pole, which is the male pole in the man, or the female pole in the woman. It's centered around the sexual organs, and the secondary pole, which is the female pole in the man and the male pole in the woman. And that there are what he calls psychic nerves that grow from the one pole to the other. And they will meet in the heart area when we get cosmic consciousness. So this is a sort of spiritual, organic structure for the experience of cosmic consciousness. So in conclusion, I can say that marriage is becoming increasingly unstable because of the growth of the opposite pole in us. Is leading us to be interested in lots of spheres of interest outside family life. We become interested in art and science, in the growth of culture, and in other people in general. We have many friendships outside our family, which nourish us in various ways that our families perhaps can't. So at the same time, our ability to be in love with the same person for a whole life degenerates. Of course, as I said before, Martinez talks from the perspective of reincarnation. So he also shows that the opposite pole means a growth in our need to express ourselves creatively in many different ways. And this can create a conflict with devoting time to our children and spouses and so on. So perhaps people would find it more easier to deal with this situation if they understood what was actually going on. So Martinez stresses that these various different kinds of sexual states have their place in a natural evolutionary process. But of course, we need to be morally alert in this process so as not to hurt other people. So Martinez's work provides us with a framework for understanding our sexual evolution, and that can give us better insight into our own identity and help us navigate through this changing sexual landscape. And here you see some references if anyone would like to have a look at them. Martinus.dk is our homepage if you want to have a look at it. Martinus, it looks like Martinus in English, Martinus.